Hello and welcome to Book Salve and the next entry in the series of 100 Great Reads. And my interest in Book 11 in this series is very much piqued by the fact that the novel's based on true life events that occurred only 6 miles away from where I was born and raised. In 1903, which was before I was born. Let's make clear about that. A series of slashings of horses, cows, and sheep occurred in the village of Great Worley in Staffordshire, England. And in October of that year, George Adalji was tried and convicted for the eighth attack in the series on a pit pony, and he was sentenced to 7 years of hard labour. His father, Sapurji Adalji, was a Parsi convert to Christianity and came from India, and he became the vicar at Great Worley. In fact, he was the first Indian vicar in England. George grew up in his house, which was very intellectual and quiet, and George trained as a solicitor and was known for his studious nature. The Adalji's families had been victims of a long-running campaign of untraceable abusive letters and anonymous harassment in 1888 and from 1892 to 1893, and these letters often contained racial slurs and xenophobic language, targeting Sapurji and Adalji as an outsider and mocking his Indian origin accent and his position in the church. And the tone of the letters revealed deep racial and cultural hostility, reflecting the attitudes of a society uncomfortable with a non-white man in a position of moral and religious authority. And these letters, and by the time 1903 came round, and alleged that he was partly responsible for these outrages on the local livestock and caused the police to focus their suspicion on him. Adalji was released in 1906 after the Chief Justice in Bahamas and others had pleaded his case, but he wasn't pardoned, and the police kept him under surveillance. And Sir Arthur Conan Doyle of Sherlock Holmes fame was persuaded to turn detective and to prove the man's innocence. So this particular 100 Great Reads book is this one. And Julian Barnes reconstructs the story of Adalji in his 2025. That's not 2000. I don't know what the year is. Not too long ago, but probably. No, don't know. Let's leave it. You can look it up. Arthur and George, which was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize in the same year that it came out, which I'm reading incorrectly here, never mind. And although you must always remember that the book is fiction, it reads as a fascinating insight into the attitudes and the legal workings of early Victorian society in England, and as a part biography of Sir Conan Doyle. Now, Barnes' writings, unadorned by florid excesses, he writes with precision and restraint, and this is exemplified well in this novel, where he's handling factual material. He sustains a style of authenticity that evokes the time period, and the rhythm and clarity of his writing makes the novel a very accessible and pleasurable read. Barnes takes the markedly different sensibilities of the two characters of Arthur and George and explores the contrast between Conan Doyle's spiritualism and belief in justice with Dalge's rationalism and faith in institutions, and shows how each man's worldview affects his response to injustice. Barnes tones down the sensationalism of the affair and concentrates on a careful fictional construction of the inner life, thoughts and dialogues of the two men. And he does, in this, display no little skill in creating psychologically plausible actions and scenes. And George is drawn with a quiet intensity. His inner loneliness, his faith in logic and stoic dignity are finally rendered. Arthur's more complex. He's a man of public action, and yet he is filled with personal contradictions. For example, his spiritualism and the grief over his wife's death. Barnes draws no moral conclusions from the story. Skillfully leads into contemplation of the themes raised, such as justice and truth and the fallibility of institutions, the complicity of silence and the complexity of personal belief systems. Arthur and George opens with 3 arresting sentences characterising Arthur as a small boy. A child wants to see. It always begins like this. And it began like this then. The child wants to see, and so he opens his eyes. And the motive of seeing becomes a central theme in the novel as it explores the search for truth, noting both the failures of perception and the limitations of evidence. And another quote from the book shows how the great whirly outrages affected George Dalge's belief in how the world worked and dealt justice, certainly in the UK, where he got a great belief that everything would be okay. George had always assumed that if he obeyed the rules, worked hard, stayed quiet, and did not draw attention to himself, then he would be left alone. He knew now that this was not the case. Not true. And George just can't understand how he is not treated as English. George did not consider himself different. He was English, educated, obedient to the law. If he had an odd name and a darker complexion, well, that was not his doing. So racism clearly played a big part in leading up to and in acquiring his conviction. Arthur, the great novelist, has a sense of moral duty. There's no greater crime than injustice, and no greater responsibility than to expose it. And yet his beliefs also contain paradoxes and misgivings. Arthur had always believed in rationalism, in evidence, in proof. But when it came to love, to grief, to ghosts, who could be certain of anything? George insists, if you were innocent, then you were innocent, and that was the end of the matter. It did not matter whether others believed it, or said they believed it, or said they did not believe it. Innocence was not a matter of opinion. And he believed that truth is not arrived at by a majority vote. It's a function of nor is it a function of the loudest voice. So, although the novel's not detective fiction, Barnes does very much draw on the Holmesian method as Doyle analyses the injustices done to George. He had dealt with mystery before, with footprints in clay and broken windows and altered telegrams. But here the facts were blunted, the footprints too old, the witnesses not reliable. What man in the middle of the night wearing boots 2 sizes too small creeps through wet fields to injure a pony and then creeps home again, leaving no trace? Well, not a solicitor with bad eyesight and a spotless record. One of the novel's richest thematic contrasts is between Doyle's belief in the unseen and George's steadfast trust in logic and order. For George, the world was governed by facts and law. For Arthur, facts could lie and laws could be unjust. And Barnes captures the fundamental difference in their worldview, one shaped by persecution and the other by imagination and grief. Arthur believed in ghosts. George believed in railway timetables. Both were disappointed in the end. That line's so dry and ironic and deeply sad, and it's a classic Julian Barnes sentence. It acknowledges that both systems of belief ultimately fail in bringing full understanding or peace, resolution. Barnes' portrayal of these contrasting beliefs is neither mocking nor dogmatic. Instead, he shows how human beings seek meaning through logic, through faith, through action, and how each system can be both illuminating and limiting. So, all in all, Arthur and George is a hugely engaging novel and one that lends itself to Julian Barnes' greatest attributes as a writer. His style, which I think can seem somewhat cold and journalistic, is a veritable blessing here, and I would very much recommend the novel to pretty much all readers, especially as they will be aware of Sherlock Holmes, Arthur Conan Doyle's fictional detective, and the idea of learning about the author's real life involvement in a criminal case is, surely irresistible. So that's Arthur and George. And all that's left for me to say is cheerio from Booksolve, and happy reading to you all. Bye-bye.